The gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Silver Creek, Montana, 1876, as Willow Parsons ducked behind an overturned water trough, her heart hammering against her ribs. The bank robbery had gone terribly wrong, not that she'd been part of it, but her brother Daniel's poor choices had once again placed her in danger by association. She clutched her small leather satchel to her chest, containing everything she owned in the world and the money Daniel had thrust into her hands before the shooting started. "Run, Willow!" had been his final words before chaos erupted. She peered around the edge of the trough, her honey-brown hair falling from its pins. The main street was clearing rapidly as townsfolk scattered for safety. Her gaze caught on a lone figure at the hitching post. Outside the saloon, a tall man untying his horse with unhurried movements despite the commotion. Something about his calm demeanor amid the panic drew her attention. Without thinking further, Willow gathered her skirts and ran toward him, dust clouding around her boots. "Please!" she gasped, reaching the stranger just as he swung into his saddle. "I need help." The man looked down at her, his face shadowed beneath the brim of a well-worn hat. Eyes the color of a summer storm assessed her with unnerving directness. "Not my trouble, madam," he replied, his voice low and rough like stone over sand. "I'll pay you," Willow blurted, desperation making her bold. "I need to get out of town, now." The shouts of the sheriff and his deputies grew louder behind her. The stranger's gaze flickered past her shoulder, then back to her face. Something shifted in his expression. "Name's Garrett Zane," he said finally, extending a calloused hand down to her. "And you just became my trouble." Before she could respond, he pulled her up behind him in one fluid motion. The horse, sensing its rider's urgency, launched forward as Willow wrapped her arms around the stranger's waist, clinging to this dangerous gamble with a man she didn't know. They rode hard until the town disappeared behind them, the vast Montana landscape spreading before them like an endless sea of grass and distant mountains. Only when they reached a small creek did Garrett slow the horse to a walk, allowing the animal to drink while Willow caught her breath. "You want to tell me who's after you and why?" he asked without turning around. Willow slid down from the horse, her legs unsteady beneath her. "My brother," she began, then corrected herself. "Because of my brother. He robbed the bank." Garrett dismounted with the easy grace of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. He was taller than she'd realized, broad-shouldered and lean-hipped in the way of men who worked hard for a living. "And you?" he asked, eyes narrowing slightly. "I had nothing to do with it," Willow insisted, lifting her chin. "But the sheriff won't believe that. Daniel's been in trouble before, and they've always assumed I was involved somehow." "Were you?" The bluntness of his question stung. "No, never." Garrett studied her for a long moment before nodding slightly. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. Touched with silver at the temples, though he couldn't have been more than 35. "Where were you heading?" he asked, dipping a bandana in the creek and wiping trail dust from his face. "I don't know," Willow admitted. "Away, somewhere I can start fresh where nobody knows my name or my brother's reputation." Garrett's expression remained unreadable as he replaced his hat. "I'm headed to my ranch near the Bitterroot Valley. You can ride along until we reach the next town. After that, you're on your own." "That's fair," Willow agreed, relieved to have even this temporary reprieve. "I can pay you for your trouble." A faint smile touched his lips, there and gone like lightning. "Keep your money. You'll need it more than me." "I insist on contributing something," she pressed. "Food, work, I won't be carried as dead weight." "Suit yourself," he replied with a shrug. "But we should move on. Your brother's mess will have folks looking in all directions." They continued riding through the day, stopping only when necessary. Willow learned that Garrett was a man of few words, answering her questions directly, but offering little beyond what was asked. By nightfall, her body ached from hours in the saddle, unused to such travel. They made camp in a sheltered draw, where Garrett efficiently built a small, nearly smokeless fire. Willow watched him move with practiced ease, setting up camp with minimal wasted motion. His actions spoke of years spent in the wilderness, self-sufficient and solitary. "You've been ranching long?" she asked, as they shared a simple meal of jerky and hardtack. 5 years on my own place," he replied. "Worked other men's land before that." "And before that?" Garrett's expression closed. War, then scouting, then cattle drives. Willow nodded, sensing the boundaries of what he was willing to discuss. I worked in a dressmaker's shop in Silver Creek, she offered instead. Before that, we lived in 3 different mining towns, following our father's dreams of striking it rich. And did he? He died trying, Willow said simply. Leaving Daniel to look after me. He tried honest work for a while, but... She trailed off, the familiar weight of disappointment settling in her chest. Garrett didn't press further. As the fire burned low, he unrolled his bedroll on one side of the fire and indicated she should take his saddle as a pillow on the other side. "I'll take first watch," he said. "Get some sleep." Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded Willow as she pondered her situation. The stranger across the fire was her lifeline for now, but she harbored no illusions about their arrangement. He had made it clear this was temporary, a courtesy extended to a woman in trouble, nothing more. Morning came with a chill that seeped into Willow's bones. She woke to find Garrett already up, the horses saddled and coffee boiling in a small pot at the edge of the rekindled fire. "You should have woken me," she said, hastily smoothing her hair and straightening her rumpled dress. "I could have helped." Garrett handed her a tin cup of steaming coffee. "You needed the rest more." They rode on through rolling hills dotted with pines and aspen groves. By midday, Willow spotted the telltale sign of smoke rising from a distant chimney. "That's Wilson's trading post," Garrett explained. "Last stop before my land. We'll resupply there." The trading post consisted of a sturdy log building with a wide porch, a corral for horses, and several outbuildings. A few wagons were parked nearby, and the sounds of conversation drifted from inside. Willow felt suddenly self-conscious about her appearance, her dress dusty and wrinkled, her hair loosely pinned after a night sleeping on the ground. She did her best to make herself presentable before they entered the store. The conversation inside faltered briefly as they entered, curious eyes taking in the newcomers before returning to their business. An older man with a magnificent white beard approached, clapping Garrett on the shoulder. "Zane, didn't expect to see you for another month at least." "Change of plans, Wilson," Garrett replied easily. "Need supplies for 2. This is Miss Parsons." Willow nodded politely, noting the speculative glance Wilson gave them both before his face broke into a broad smile. "Any friend of Zane's is welcome here," he said warmly. "Take what you need." While Garrett gathered supplies, Willow found herself drawn to a small selection of fabrics and sewing notions. Her fingers traced the pattern on a bolt of calico, missing her work at the dressmaker's shop. "You sew?" Wilson's wife had appeared beside her, a kind-faced woman with silver-streaked dark hair. "Yes, I was a seamstress in Silver Creek," Willow replied. The woman's eyes brightened. "We don't get many with that skill out here. Most folks make do with what they have." An idea formed in Willow's mind. "I could mend or alter things." "If anyone needs it," she offered, "while we're here." Within minutes, Mrs. Wilson had spread the word, and several of the trading post's customers approached with torn shirts, pants needing patching, and even a wedding dress requiring alterations. Willow sat up at a small table in the corner, grateful for the familiar work and the few coins pressed into her palm after each repair. Garrett watched from across the room, his expression unreadable as she skillfully worked the needle and thread. When she finally finished the last item, a torn jacket belonging to a miner, he approached. "Ready to move on?" he asked. "Still a few hours of daylight left." Willow nodded, gathering her borrowed sewing kit. "Thank you for your patience," she said. "I earned a little money to contribute to our supplies." Something flickered in Garrett's eyes. Respect, perhaps. He nodded once before turning to settle their account with Wilson. As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Wilson pressed a small package into Willow's hands. "Some fabric scraps and extra thread," she explained. "Might come in handy where you're headed." Willow thanked her, touched by the kindness of this stranger. Back on the trail, the afternoon stretched before them, the mountains growing larger on the horizon. Garrett seemed more talkative than before, pointing out landmarks and sharing bits of knowledge about the territory. "How much further to your ranch?" Willow asked as the sun began its descent. "We'll reach it tomorrow," he replied. "It's not much to look at yet, still building it up." "Do you have help? Workers or family?" A shadow crossed his face. "Just me. Had a partner once, but he didn't make it back from the war. Willow sensed the weight of loss in those simple words. I'm sorry, she said softly. Garrett nodded once in acknowledgement before changing the subject. There's a good camping spot ahead, near a hot spring. We can wash off some of this trail dust. The prospect of hot water was too tempting for Willow to worry about propriety. When they reached the spring, a steaming pool nestled among rocks with a small cascade feeding it, Garrett tactfully announced he would hunt for fresh meat and disappeared into the trees, giving her privacy. Willow gratefully stripped down to her chemise and stockings, submerging herself in the blissfully warm water. She washed her hair and scrubbed her skin until it glowed pink, then reluctantly emerged to rinse her dress as best she could. By the time Garrett returned with 2 rabbits, she was dressed again, her damp hair hanging down her back in waves as she tended the small fire she'd built. If Garrett noticed her transformation, he made no comment, though his eyes lingered on her for a moment longer than usual. He efficiently dressed the rabbits and set them to roast over the fire. You've been kind to help me, Willow said, as they ate the simple but satisfying meal. Most men wouldn't have stopped. Garrett continued eating for a moment before responding. I've been on both sides of trouble. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to extend a hand. Is that what happened to you? She asked, curiosity overcoming her usual caution. He stared into the fire, shadows playing across the angles of his face. After the war, I wasn't right in the head. Got into a bad fight in a Kansas town, nearly killed a man. Sheriff there could have locked me up, but instead, he put me to work on his brother's ranch. Said hard work in open country heals most wounds. Was he right? A ghost of a smile touched Garrett's lips. Mostly. Some wounds just scar over. They fell silent, the crackling of the fire and distant calls of night birds the only sounds. Willow found herself studying the man across from her, the strong lines of his face, the capable hands that had built a life from nothing, the eyes that had seen too much but still held kindness. What will you do after we reach the next town? Garrett asked suddenly. Willow sighed. Find work if I can, move on if I must. I have some skills that travel well. What would you do if you could choose anything? The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked her that before, not her father with his endless schemes, not Daniel with his desperation for easy money. I'd have my own shop, she said softly, surprised by how clear the vision was. Make dresses and fine clothes, yes, but also teach other women the trade, create beautiful things, and build a life that belongs to me alone. Garrett nodded, as if her answer satisfied something in him. Good dreams, he said simply. Worth chasing. The next day dawned clear and bright. They packed up camp efficiently, working together with the ease of people who had known each other far longer than 2 days. As they rode, the landscape changed, opening into a verdant valley with a silver ribbon of river winding through it. Bitterroot Valley, Garrett announced. My place is just beyond that ridge. Willow felt an unexpected pang at the reminder that their journey together would soon end. She had grown accustomed to his quiet presence, the sense of security he provided without demands or expectations. When they crested the ridge, Garrett reined his horse to a stop, allowing her to take in the view. Below them stretched a modest ranch, a sturdy cabin, with smoke curling from its chimney, a barn, corrals, and beyond them, meadows dotted with cattle. It wasn't large or grand, but even from this distance, Willow could see the care that had gone into building it. You said it wasn't much, she remarked, but it's beautiful. Something like pride flickered across Garrett's face. It's coming along? As they approached, Willow noticed a figure emerge from the cabin, an older man with a slight limp who waved at their approach. You didn't mention you had help, she said. Henry Morgan, Garrett explained. Former cavalry scout. Comes by when I'm away to keep an eye on things, not a permanent arrangement. They rode into the yard, where Henry greeted them with undisguised curiosity at Willow's presence. Didn't expect company, boss, he said after introductions were made. Miss Parsons needed assistance getting clear of some trouble, Garrett explained succinctly. She'll be staying until we can arrange transport to the next town. Henry's weathered face split into a grin. Well now, been telling you this place could use a woman's touch. No offense, miss, he added quickly to Willow. None taken, she assured him, dismounting with Garrett's assistance. The cabin was simple, but solid one main room, with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, a table with chairs, and a curtained-off sleeping area. Everything was neat and functional, if sparse. Through the single window, Willow could see a small veranda facing west toward the mountains. "It's not much," Garrett said, echoing his earlier words as he placed her satchel on the table. "But it's dry and warm." "It's wonderful," Willow replied honestly. After years of boarding houses and rented rooms above shops, the cabin with its sense of permanence and purpose felt like a revelation. Henry had apparently been cooking when they arrived, as a pot of stew simmered on the stove. The three of them shared the meal, with Henry dominating the conversation, sharing stories of the territory and not so subtly probing for information about how Willow and Garrett had met. "Saved her from some trouble," was all Garrett would say, and Henry, despite his curiosity, knew better than to press. After dinner, Henry announced he would sleep in the barn as usual, giving Willow his customary place on the pallet near the fire. Despite her protests, both men insisted. "Been sleeping rough since before you were born, miss," Henry declared. "Barn's downright luxurious compared to some places." When Henry had gone, an awkward silence fell between Willow and Garrett. The intimacy of the cabin, so different from their nights under the stars, seemed to heighten her awareness of him as a man rather than just her rescuer. "I'll make arrangements to get you to Eagle Pass in a day or two," Garrett said, breaking the silence as he stoked the fire. "It's growing fast, plenty of opportunities for someone with your skills." "Thank you," Willow replied, though the prospect of leaving brought less relief than it should have. "In the meantime, I'd like to earn my keep. I noticed your shirts could use mending, and I'm handy with cooking and cleaning as well." Garrett looked like he might protest, then nodded. "Fair enough. I won't turn down good cooking or mended clothes." That night, lying on the pallet with Garrett's steady breathing from the curtained area across the room, Willow found herself imagining what it would be like to stay to make this cabin a home, to build something lasting in this wild, beautiful place. It was a dangerous path for her thoughts to travel, she knew. Garrett had been clear about their arrangement from the beginning, yet something had changed between them on the journey. She'd seen glimpses of the man beneath the guarded exterior, his quiet competence, his unexpected moments of kindness, the way he treated her with respect rather than as a burden. Morning brought new awareness as Willow rose to find Garrett already gone, his bed neatly made. She washed quickly in the basin of water, left warming by the stove, then set about making breakfast from the provisions in the small pantry. By the time Garrett and Henry returned from their morning chores, she had biscuits baking, coffee brewing, and bacon frying in the cast-iron skillet. "Lord have mercy," Henry exclaimed, inhaling deeply. "If that don't beat all, boss, you might want to reconsider letting this one go." Willow caught the flicker of something in Garrett's eyes before he turned away to wash up at the basin by the door. "Miss Parsons has her own plans," he said simply. Over breakfast, Garrett explained the workings of the ranch, the cattle operation he was slowly building, the horses he bred and trained on the side, the challenges of the harsh winters and dry summers. "Doing it all alone is the real challenge," Henry interjected. "Man needs a partner out here." Garrett shot him a warning look, but Henry just shrugged and continued eating his biscuits with obvious enjoyment. After breakfast, Willow insisted on touring the ranch. Garrett showed her the barn with its stalls for the horses, the workshop where he repaired tack and tools, the garden plot that had seen better days. "Had no time for it this season," he explained as Willow examined the neglected rows. "Prioritized the livestock." "I could help," she offered. "There's still time to salvage some of it and plant for late harvest." Garrett studied her for a long moment. "You're not staying that long." "Even so," she replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "It would be satisfying to leave something growing behind me." That afternoon, Willow worked in the garden, while Garrett and Henry rode out to check the cattle. She found gardening tools in the barn and set about clearing weeds, turning soil, and rescuing the struggling plants. The physical labor felt good after days on horseback, grounding her in the present moment rather than worrying about the future. By the time the men returned, she had transformed the neglected patch into ordered rows, the surviving plants watered and freed from choking weeds. She'd also gathered wild berries from bushes at the edge of the clearing and had a pie baking in the oven when they walked through the door. "Smells like heaven," Henry declared, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. Garrett said nothing, but his eyes took in the changed cabin, the swept floor, the organized shelves, the wildflowers in a jar on the table before meeting Willow's gaze with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. That evening, Henry announced he would head home to his own small place a few miles away, now that Garrett had returned. The older man winked at Willow as he mounted his horse. "Don't let him fool you with that serious face," he said, nodding toward Garrett. "There's a good man under all that brooding. Just needs someone to remind him of it now and then." After Henry left, an awkward tension filled the cabin. Willow busied herself with dishes while Garrett sat at the table, making entries in a ledger. The domesticity of the scene struck her how natural it felt, how easily she could imagine this becoming routine. "You work hard," Garrett said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Most women who've been through what you have would be resting." Willow smiled slightly. "Work keeps the mind from wandering down dark paths. My grandmother taught me that." Wise woman. She was. Willow dried her hands on a towel and sat across from him at the table. She also said idle hands make poor company, but honest work builds bridges between strangers. Garrett closed his ledger, giving her his full attention. "And has it? Built a bridge?" "I think so," she replied softly. "At least I understand you better now than when we met." "And what do you understand?" Willow considered her words carefully. "That you're a man who values his independence but carries a weight of responsibility. That you build things to last. That beneath your caution, there's kindness." Garrett looked slightly uncomfortable with her assessment. "You're reading a lot into simple decency." "Am I?" She held his gaze. "You could have left me in Silver Creek. You could have dropped me at the trading post. You didn't have to share your home, even temporarily. Like I said, I've been on both sides of trouble." "It's more than that," Willow insisted gently. "But I won't press you to admit it." Garrett stood abruptly. "I should check on the horses before turning in." Willow watched him go, aware she had pushed too far. The man was unused to having his actions examined, his motives questioned. Yet she couldn't regret the exchange. Something had shifted between them, a step toward honesty that went beyond their practical arrangement. Days passed with surprising swiftness. Willow settled into a routine of cooking, mending, and working in the garden. Garrett spent his days tending the ranch, but increasingly found reasons to be nearby, fixing the garden fence, repairing the cabin roof, building a new bench for the veranda. They spoke more freely with each passing day. Garrett told her about his childhood on a farm in Missouri, his time in the war that had left both physical and invisible scars, his dream of building a ranch that would outlast him. Willow shared stories of her own, her mother's death when she was young, her father's restless search for fortune, Daniel's slide from honest worker to outlaw. "Do you think he survived?" Garrett asked one evening as they sat on the veranda watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. Willow sighed. "I hope so, but he's made so many enemies, and he never thinks before he acts. Unlike his sister." She smiled at that. "I've had to be the practical one. One of us needed to be." On the 7th day, Garrett announced he would ride to Eagle Pass the following morning to make arrangements for Willow's transportation and future accommodations. The news, though expected, struck her with unexpected force. "I'll speak to Mrs. Donovan at the boarding house," he explained. "She's a good woman, fair with her rates. And the mercantile owner mentioned needing someone with sewing skills when I was there last." "That's very thoughtful," Willow replied, struggling to maintain her composure. "Thank you." That night, she found sleep elusive. The prospect of leaving the ranch, leaving Garrett, filled her with a sense of loss that went beyond gratitude for his help. Somehow, in the span of a week, this place had begun to feel like home in a way nowhere else ever had. More troubling were her feelings for Garrett himself. She had begun to recognize the warmth that spread through her when he was near, the way she found herself watching him work, admiring the strength and grace of his movements. It was dangerous territory for a woman in her position, dependent on his charity, with no claim on his affections. Morning came too quickly. Willow rose early to prepare a hearty breakfast for Garrett's journey. He seemed subdued as well, eating quickly before checking his saddlebags. "I should be back by nightfall," he said, buckling the bags closed. "It's only a few hours' ride each way." "Be safe," Willow replied, handing him a package of food for the journey. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, a momentary contact that nonetheless sent awareness crackling between them. Garrett's eyes met hers, and for an instant, she thought he might say something more. Instead, he nodded once and headed for the door. Willow busied herself with chores after he left, determined to leave the cabin better than she had found it. She scrubbed floors, washed windows, and baked bread to fill the emptiness of the day. By mid-afternoon, she had run out of indoor tasks and ventured to the garden. The vegetables she had salvaged were thriving, and she took pleasure in watering them, imagining how they would grow long after she had gone. A sound from the direction of the road caught her attention, horses approaching, more than one. Thinking Garrett had returned early, perhaps with a wagon for her journey to Eagle Pass, Willow wiped her hands on her apron and walked toward the front of the cabin. The sight that greeted her froze her in place. 3 riders approached, none of them Garrett. As they drew closer, she recognized the center figure with a jolt of dismay. Sheriff Claiborne from Silver Creek, flanked by 2 deputies. Willow's heart raced as she considered her options. Running would only confirm guilt. Standing her ground was risky, but perhaps her best choice. She straightened her spine and waited as they rode into the yard. "Miss Parsons," Sheriff Claiborne called, dismounting with a grunt. He was a heavy-set man with a perpetually sour expression. "Fancy finding you here, so far from Silver Creek." "Sheriff," she acknowledged, keeping her voice steady. "What brings you to these parts?" "I think you know," he replied, his hand resting on his gun belt. "Your brother Daniel made quite a mess before he died, left a trail that led straight to you." The news of Daniel's death struck her like a physical blow, but Willow forced herself to remain composed. "I had nothing to do with the robbery. That money he passed to you says different." The sheriff took a step closer. "Where is it, Miss Parsons?" "I don't have it." "Search the cabin," Claiborne ordered one of his deputies. To Willow, he said, "Your brother was shot trying to escape. Before he died, he admitted you were his accomplice, planned the whole thing together," he said. Willow shook her head in disbelief. Even dying, Daniel had found a way to implicate her. "He lied," she said flatly. "I never planned anything with him." "We'll let a judge sort that out," Claiborne replied. "Meanwhile, you'll be coming back with us." The deputy emerged from the cabin empty-handed. "Nothing, Sheriff." "Where's the money, Miss Parsons?" Claiborne demanded again. "I told you, I don't have it." The sheriff's face darkened with anger. "Who owns this place? Where is he?" "Gone to town," Willow replied, praying Garrett would stay away until these men left. She didn't want him drawn into her troubles. "Well, we'll wait for him then," Claiborne decided, settling himself on the bench by the door. "I'd like to ask why he's harboring a known criminal." Hours passed in tense silence. Willow remained standing in the yard, refusing the deputy's suggestions that she sit. As evening approached, her anxiety grew. Garrett would be returning soon, riding into a dangerous situation, unaware. The sound of hoofbeats finally came, just as the sun touched the western mountains. Willow's heart sank as Garrett appeared on the ridge, his figure silhouetted against the golden light. She watched as he spotted the unfamiliar horses, his posture changing instantly from relaxed to alert. He approached cautiously, one hand near his holstered gun. When he reached the yard, his eyes found Willow first, checking for signs of distress before turning to the sheriff. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm. Sheriff Claiborne stood. "You the owner here?" "I am, Garrett Zane. Sheriff Claiborne, Silver Creek." The sheriff hitched his thumbs in his belt. "This woman is wanted in connection with a bank robbery. I'm taking her back to stand trial." Garrett's expression remained neutral as he dismounted. "That right?" he asked, glancing at Willow. "It's not," she said firmly. "My brother robbed the bank. I had nothing to do with it." "She was seen accepting money from the robber," Claiborne interjected, "and her brother confirmed her involvement before he died." "Her brother?" Garrett repeated, moving to stand near Willow. "Not her." "Look, Zane, this isn't your concern. The woman's coming with us, one way or another." Something dangerous flickered in Garrett's eyes. "The woman has a name," he said quietly. "And she's under my protection while she's on my land." "You harboring a criminal?" one of the deputies asked, hand moving to his gun. "I'm protecting an innocent woman from being railroaded," Garrett replied. "Now, why don't we all calm down and discuss this like civilized folks?" The tension in the yard was palpable as the men sized each other up. Willow could see the calculation in Garrett's eyes, 3 armed men against 1. Poor odds even for someone with his skills. "There's nothing to discuss," Claiborne said finally. "We have witnesses who saw her take the money from her brother during the robbery. That makes her an accomplice." "I took nothing during the robbery," Willow interjected, anger overcoming caution. "Daniel thrust that bag at me before it even started, told me to run. I had no idea what was in it or what he was planning." "Convenient story," the sheriff scoffed. "It's the truth," she insisted. Garrett's voice cut through the argument. "Where's the money now?" All eyes turned to him in surprise. "What?" Claiborne demanded. "The stolen money," Garrett clarified. "If she took it, where is it? Have you found it?" The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "Not yet." "And if she's been running with this money for over a week, why is she still here, working in my garden, mending my clothes?" Garrett continued. "Seems an odd choice for a bank robber on the run." "Maybe she has an arrangement with you," one of the deputies suggested with a smirk. Garrett's expression hardened dangerously. "Choose your next words carefully," he warned. Claiborne raised a hand to silence his deputy. "The money's not the only issue. We have her brother's dying confession." "The desperate words of a dying man trying to shift blame," Garrett countered. "Not exactly reliable evidence." "That's for a judge to decide." Garrett studied the sheriff for a long moment. "What if I could prove she didn't have the money? Would that change things?" Claiborne frowned. "How would you do that?" "Give me until morning," Garrett requested. "Miss Parsons stays here tonight. You gentlemen are welcome to camp nearby, not on my property, but within sight of the cabin if you're concerned about her fleeing. Tomorrow, I'll have your proof." The sheriff considered the proposal, clearly weighing his options. "First light," he finally agreed. "But my men will take shifts watching the cabin all night. Any attempt to escape, and we'll consider it confirmation of guilt." "Understood," Garrett replied. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have matters to discuss." The sheriff and his deputies retreated to make camp by the road, close enough to watch the cabin, but far enough to give some privacy. As soon as they were out of earshot, Willow turned to Garrett. "What are you doing?" she whispered urgently. "You can't prove I don't have the money because I did take it from Daniel. I just didn't know it was stolen when he gave it to me." Garrett led her inside the cabin, closing the door behind them. "Where is it now?" Willow hesitated, then reached for her satchel on the shelf. From a hidden pocket, she extracted a small pouch. "Here, I was saving it to start my shop." Garrett took the pouch, weighing it in his hand. "This isn't enough to be the bank's money." "What?" Willow was genuinely confused. "The Silver Creek Bank was robbed of over $2,000, Garrett explained. "How much is in here?" Willow stared at him. "Just over $100. It's all Daniel gave me." Garrett's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Your brother was working with someone else. They got away with the bulk of the money, and he gave you just enough to run with." "But why would he implicate me?" Willow asked, pain evident in her voice. "To protect his real partner," Garrett suggested. "By pointing the law at you, he diverted attention from whoever has the real money." The revelation stunned Willow. Even dying, Daniel had been playing angles, using her as a distraction. The hurt of this final betrayal was almost more than she could bear. "So what do we do?" she asked, her voice small. Garrett paced the room, thinking. "First, we need to convince Claiborne you're not his thief. The amount alone should cast doubt on their case, but it won't be enough." "But I did take money from Daniel on the day of the robbery," Willow pointed out. "Yes, but not during the robbery itself, if what you say is true." Garrett stopped pacing. "When exactly did Daniel give you this money?" Willow closed her eyes, trying to recall the exact sequence of events. "It was early morning. I was getting ready for work when he burst into my room, thrust the bag at me, and told me to leave town immediately. He said he'd done something that would cause trouble, and I needed to be far away when it happened." "And the robbery?" "It happened around noon, from what I heard later." "I was already on the outskirts of town by then." Garrett nodded slowly. "So the money he gave you couldn't have been from the robbery. It must have been his share from some previous job." "Or payment to ensure I'd be gone when it happened," Willow said bitterly. "Either way, it proves you weren't his accomplice." Garrett sat beside her at the table. "Claiborne's case is already falling apart. The amount doesn't match, and the timing doesn't work. But it's still my word against my dead brothers. Maybe not, Garrett said thoughtfully. When I was in Eagle Pass today, I heard rumors about a man spending freely at the saloon, a stranger with more cash than a drifter should have. Could be Daniel's real partner. Hope flickered in Willow's chest. If we could prove that, it's a start, Garrett agreed. But first, we need to deal with Claiborne. They spent the evening formulating a plan, speaking in low voices to avoid being overheard by the deputies watching the cabin. As night fell, Garrett insisted Willow take the bed while he kept watch by the door, his rifle across his knees. In the darkness, Willow's thoughts churned with fear and confusion. "Why are you helping me?" she finally asked, her voice barely audible. "You barely know me. This could cost you everything." Garrett was silent for so long, she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was rough with emotion. "Because I know what it's like to be judged for someone else's actions, to carry a name stained by another's choices." "Your partner from the war?" she guessed. "My father," Garrett corrected. "He was a thief and a coward who abandoned his family. His name, my name, was mud in 3 counties. Every time something went missing, every time trouble started, folks looked to me first. Because I was John Zane's boy." Willow sat up, barely able to make out his silhouette in the darkness. "That's why you understood about Daniel. Difference is, you never followed your brother's path. You stayed honest despite him." The admiration in Garrett's voice warmed her. "That takes a kind of courage most people don't have." "I don't feel courageous right now," she admitted. "Courage isn't about not feeling fear," Garrett replied softly. "It's about doing what's right despite it." Morning came too quickly. Willow had barely slept, her mind racing with anxiety about the confrontation to come. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, needing the routine to steady her nerves. Garrett joined her at the stove, his presence a comfort in the early morning quiet. "Remember the plan," he murmured. "Let me do the talking. No matter what Claiborne says, stay calm." She nodded, grateful for his steady confidence. Sheriff Claiborne and his deputies arrived as the first rays of sunlight crept over the eastern ridge. They looked tired and irritable after their night outdoors. "Time's up, Zane," Claiborne called from the yard. "Where's this proof you promised?" Garrett stepped onto the porch, motioning for Willow to remain inside for the moment. "Sheriff, how much money was stolen from the Silver Creek Bank?" Claiborne frowned at the question. $2,437. "And you believe Miss Parsons has this money?" "Her brother passed it to her during the robbery," the sheriff insisted. Witnesses saw the exchange. Garrett nodded thoughtfully. "Interesting, because the total sum in Miss Parsons' possession is $112. He held up the small pouch. "Hardly the haul from a bank robbery." Claiborne's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "She could have spent some, or hidden the rest." "She's been here for a week, Sheriff, working in my garden, cooking my meals, mending my clothes. When exactly would she have spent or hidden thousands of dollars?" "That doesn't explain why her brother claims she was involved," one of the deputies interjected. "Doesn't it?" Garrett countered. "Daniel Parsons was dying. He knew he'd been caught. What better way to protect his real accomplice than to point the law at his innocent sister?" Claiborne shifted uncomfortably. "We still have witnesses who saw her take the money bag from her brother on the day of the robbery." "At what time?" The question seemed to catch the sheriff off guard. "What?" "At what time did these witnesses see this exchange?" Garrett pressed. "Around noon, during the robbery," Claiborne replied with less certainty. "Call Miss Parsons out here," Garrett suggested. "Ask her when her brother gave her this money." Willow stepped onto the porch at Garrett's nod, her heart pounding, but her voice steady as she recounted the morning visit from Daniel, hours before the robbery took place. "Anyone can make up a story," Claiborne scoffed, though doubt had begun to creep into his expression. "Mrs. Wilkins at the boarding house," Willow said suddenly. "She saw Daniel visit me that morning. She commented on it when I was leaving with my bag. Asked if everything was all right because he'd seemed agitated." The sheriff exchanged glances with his deputies. It was clear their certainty was wavering. "And there's more," Garrett added. "While in Eagle Pass yesterday, I heard about a stranger spending freely at the saloon. A man who matches the description of one of Daniel's known associates. A man who was also seen in Silver Creek the day before the robbery." This new information clearly caught Claiborne's attention. "What man?" "Tall fellow with a scar along his jaw. Goes by the name of Mears." Recognition flashed in the sheriff's eyes. "Tom Mears was in Silver Creek last week. Claimed he was just passing through." "Seems he passed through with your bank's money," Garrett suggested. The pieces were falling into place, and Willow could see the sheriff's resolve weakening as he considered this new theory. "If what you're saying is true," Claiborne said slowly, "then Mears has the money, not Miss Parsons." "And he's in Eagle Pass right now," Garrett confirmed, "spending it freely while an innocent woman takes the blame." The sheriff rubbed his jaw, clearly weighing his options. "We'll check your story," he said finally. "But if Mears is in Eagle Pass with the money, that changes things." "And Miss Parsons?" Garrett pressed. Claiborne studied Willow for a long moment. "She stays here until we confirm your information. If Mears has the money and witnesses place him with Daniel before the robbery, we'll reconsider her involvement." It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a reprieve. Willow felt a weight lift from her shoulders as the sheriff and one deputy mounted their horses to ride for Eagle Pass, leaving the second deputy behind to keep watch. Once they were gone, Garrett turned to Willow with a hint of a smile. First step accomplished. "Do you think they'll find Mears?" she asked quietly. "If he's still there," Garrett replied. "But even if they don't, we've planted doubt, and doubt is sometimes enough to make lawmen reconsider their certainties." The day passed slowly, with the remaining deputy maintaining a watchful position near the barn. Willow tried to occupy herself with normal tasks, but her nerves were stretched thin with waiting. Garrett kept busy with ranch work, though he never strayed far from the cabin. As evening approached with no sign of the sheriff's return, Garrett prepared dinner for the three of them, insisting on bringing a plate to the deputy. "No sense in the man going hungry while doing his job," he remarked to Willow as he carried the food outside. She watched through the window as Garrett spoke with the deputy, their conversation appearing cordial despite the circumstances. When Garrett returned, there was satisfaction in his eyes. "Deputy Jenkins is more reasonable than his boss," he told Willow quietly. "Says Claiborne's been under pressure to solve this robbery quickly because the bank owner is his wife's cousin. Might explain his eagerness to close the case, even with flimsy evidence." Night fell without word from Eagle Pass. The deputy built a small fire near the barn, settling in for another night of guard duty. Inside the cabin, Garrett and Willow spoke in hushed tones about what might happen next. "If they find Mears with the money, you'll be cleared," Garrett said, stoking the fire in the hearth. "And if they don't?" He turned to face her, his expression solemn. "Then we move to the next option, which is getting you safely away from here." His eyes held hers steadily. "I won't let them take you, Willow." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the intimacy of it sent a tremor through her. "I can't ask you to risk yourself for me." "You didn't ask," he replied simply. The intensity of his gaze made her heart race. There was something unspoken between them, growing stronger with each passing day. Willow took a step closer to him, drawn by a force she couldn't name. "Garrett," she began, uncertain what she wanted to say. The sound of approaching horses interrupted the moment. They both tensed, moving to the window to see Sheriff Claiborne and his deputy returning, accompanied by a third rider, a man with his hands bound, slumped in the saddle. "They found Mears," Garrett said, relief evident in his voice. They stepped onto the porch as the riders entered the yard. In the light spilling from the cabin, Willow could see that the bound man was indeed Tom Mears, a drifter she'd seen in Daniel's company once or twice. His face was bruised, suggesting he hadn't come quietly. "Found him at the saloon," Claiborne announced, dismounting stiffly. With over $2,000 stuffed in his saddlebags and a letter from Daniel Parsons explaining their plan. "And," Garrett prompted. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. "And it appears Miss Parsons wasn't involved. At least, not according to the letter. Daniel wrote that he was sending her away with some money to keep her safe, not because she was part of the robbery." Relief washed over Willow, so intense she felt her knees weaken. Garrett's hand on her elbow steadied her. "So, she's free to go?" Garrett asked. Claiborne nodded reluctantly. "No charges will be filed against her. But I'd advise staying away from Silver Creek, Miss Parsons. Your brother made a lot of enemies there." "I have no intention of returning," Willow assured him, her voice stronger than she felt. The sheriff and his deputies departed with their prisoner at first light. leaving Willow and Garrett standing in the yard as the dust settled behind them. The sudden absence of threat left an odd emptiness in its wake. "It's over," Garrett said, turning to Willow. "You're free to go wherever you choose." The words should have brought joy, but instead, Willow felt a curious hollowness. The prospect of leaving the ranch, leaving Garrett, suddenly seemed like a greater loss than anything she had faced before. "I suppose I should pack my things," she said, not meeting his eyes. "You mentioned arrangements in Eagle Pass." "I did," Garrett confirmed, his voice carefully neutral. "Mrs. Donovan has a room available, and the mercantile owner is looking for someone with sewing skills." Willow nodded, fighting back unexpected tears. "That's very kind of you to arrange." "It's what you wanted," he reminded her. "Your own shop someday, a life that belongs to you alone." "Yes," she whispered, the dream suddenly less appealing than it had been before she met him. They stood in awkward silence, neither moving toward the cabin. A breeze rustled the aspen leaves, their golden coins shimmering in the morning light. "When would you like to leave?" Garrett finally asked. Willow gathered her courage and looked up at him. "Do you want me to go?" The question hung between them, charged with all the unspoken feelings of the past days. Garrett's expression remained unreadable for a long moment before something shifted in his eyes. "No," he said simply. "I don't." The admission, so plainly stated, lifted a weight from Willow's heart. "Then why arrange for me to stay in Eagle Pass?" "Because I thought it was what you wanted," Garrett replied, taking a step closer to her. "A fresh start, away from trouble, your own life, on your own terms." "What if what I want has changed?" Willow asked softly. Garrett's eyes searched hers. "What do you want now, Willow?" The directness of the question demanded equal honesty in return. Willow took a deep breath, summoning her courage. "I want to stay," she said. "Here, with you, if you'll have me." Something like wonder crossed Garrett's face. "You barely know me." "I know enough," she countered. "I know you're a man who builds rather than destroys, who offers help without expecting payment, who sees people for who they are, not who others claim them to be." Garrett took another step closer, close enough now that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Life out here is hard," he warned. "Winters are brutal. The work never ends." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Willow replied, "and I'd rather face a brutal winter with you than an easy life elsewhere alone." Garrett raised a hand to her face, his calloused fingers gentle against her cheek. "You don't owe me this, Willow. Not for helping you, not for anything." Willow covered his hand with her own, holding it against her skin. "I know," she whispered. "That's why I'm offering it freely." The last barrier between them dissolved with those words. Garrett's arms encircled her, drawing her against his chest as his lips found hers in a kiss that spoke of longing, relief, and promise. Willow melted into him, her hands sliding up to his shoulders, anchoring herself to this man who had become her safe harbor in a storm. When they finally parted, Garrett rested his forehead against hers, his breath mingling with her own. "Stay," he said, the word both a request and a pledge. "Stay and build this life with me." "Yes," Willow answered, her heart fuller than she had ever known it could be. "Yes, I'll stay." In the days and weeks that followed, Willow and Garrett forged a partnership that transcended their initial meeting. The garden flourished under her care, providing vegetables for their table and seeds for the following spring. Garrett built shelves in the cabin for her sewing supplies, and word spread through the valley about her skill with needle and thread. Ranchers' wives and townspeople from Eagle Pass soon made the journey to have garments made or mended by her capable hands. They were married that autumn, a simple ceremony performed by the traveling preacher with Henry Morgan and Mrs. Wilson from the trading post as witnesses. Standing before the small gathering, Willow wore a dress of cream-colored fabric she had sewn herself, adorned with delicate embroidery of wildflowers from the valley. As they exchanged vows on the veranda of the cabin that had become their home, Willow thought of the strange twists of fate that had brought her here, her brother's final, unwitting gift in sending her away from danger and into the path of the man who now placed a ring on her finger. "I take you as my wife," Garrett said, his voice steady and sure, "not out of obligation or duty, but because loving you has become as natural as breathing." "And I take you as my husband," Willow replied, her eyes shining with unshed tears, "giving you my heart freely, without reservation or condition. That evening, as they stood together on the veranda watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Garrett's arm around her waist and her head resting against his shoulder, Willow realized she had found what had eluded her all her life, not just a place to belong, but a person to belong with. "What are you thinking?" Garrett asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. Willow smiled, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. "That sometimes the path you never planned to take leads exactly where you're meant to be." Garrett turned her in his arms to face him, his eyes reflecting the last light of day. "And where is that, Mrs. Zane?" "Home," Willow answered simply, rising on tiptoe to kiss him as twilight settled over their land. "Right here, with you." Years later, when their cabin had expanded to accommodate their growing family, when the ranch had prospered beyond their early hopes, when silver threads had begun to appear in Garrett's dark hair and laugh lines framed Willow's eyes, they would still sometimes sit on that same veranda and remember the strange circumstances that had brought them together. "Do you ever regret it?" Garrett would ask occasionally. "Staying here instead of opening your shop in town?" And Willow would always shake her head, watching their children play in the yard that had once seemed so empty and quiet. "Never," she would reply with absolute certainty. Some dreams change when you find something even better than what you thought you wanted. In the end, it was not the life either of them had envisioned for themselves. It was something richer, deeper, built on a foundation of choice rather than obligation, the love given freely between two people who had learned the hard way that the most precious things in life cannot be taken, only offered with open hands and willing hearts.